let's talk about policing and prison abolition. According to RTI International, police violence and aggressive policing can have deeply negative implications for those who survive their injuries or even encounters, including psychological distress, illness, and degraded educational performance, and result in unfavorable attitudes toward law enforcement as well. It's like cyclical, right? And the act of over-policing, which is the excessive police presence in certain neighborhoods, let's add schools, create a sense of surveillance and intimidation. As a prison abolitionist, it is your aim to end, prison system and policies and replace it with community care and rehabilitation. What are some alternatives to punishment and incarceration?
I would really encourage folks to, especially for New Yorkers, to research how many folks are being kept in cages on Rikers Island due to nonviolent crimes. Mm-hmm. If folks want to, they can check out groups like Court Watch NYC. So Court Watch NYC, which I'm part of, trains volunteers to go into the courtrooms, which are public spaces. We're all allegedly, at least for now, we can all be court watchers. At least for now, allowed into courtrooms, their public spaces, to watch when arraignments are happening, right? At the point of arraignment, that means that someone's been kidnapped by the police, taken into a precinct, transferred to central bookings, and is being, forced to appear in front of a judge.
When we say kidnapped by police, there is no just cause. Are we still filling quotas? Is that a real thing?
Filling quotas is a thing. The reason why I use the word kidnapping is because that's what it is. It is a non-consensual removal of a person in a community from their environment, regardless of what their actions have been. That is not an effective. It is not an effective strategy, solution, route. It's just not, and we've seen that time and time again, right? And so Court Watch NYC trains up folks to go into these courtrooms to record the judge's behavior, to record, what bail they may or may not set. And we see these horrible cases where, someone took a beer from a grocery store and now they're being held for $25,000 of bail. I don't drink beer because I have celiac disease. How much is a beer? Like $3, $5?
It might have gone up. It might be $3 now.
Okay,
three something,
right? $3 versus now $25,000 that you have to come up with in some way, shape, or form. Otherwise, you are still in that cage. How is that? What is that accomplishing? It's sustained confinement, right? Like they're holding on to people.
What happened when we had all of this bail reform?
Bail reform was hard fought and hard won. The law is a made-up thing, right? Like the law is implemented and determined by the people making it up, enforcing it, implementing it, and determining it, right?
So are religious texts, sure.
Exactly. Yeah. So we're still seeing cases where unreasonable bail, or what most people would describe as unreasonable if they were aware of the circumstances, being set for different things, right? I think a lot of the times when we talk about prison and policing abolition, people get very panicked and they ask the questions of, okay, well, what if the harm or violence that has happened is something really serious? What if someone died? What if, it's domestic violence case, et cetera? Even in those things, putting that person in a cage, one, doesn't mean that you somehow prevented the violence from happening at all, right? Cops are not preventing anything. They react to things. There still needs to be accountability, right? There still needs to be support for the people impacted. There still needs to be relationship repair. Accountability and some consequences might look like, hey, there needs to be distance between these two people, or this person who caused this type of harm might now be on a lifelong journey of making amends, of understanding what got to that point. But this is where, just kind of blanketly throwing people in cages doesn't accomplish anything. And it's surely not also shifting either our culture or how we have relationships with one another that might and would most likely prevent that from happening to begin with.
We always cherry pick that story, and because there are so few of them,
Yes.
of young men being detained, and now they're 40, 50 years old, and they come out and they're a different person and their life has changed. But they were going to be that anyway. They were going to be that changed person anyway. That's life.
Right. And so, like I spent this past weekend at the Beyond the Bars conference
Yes,
at Columbia. It's on mass incarceration, and it's, a gathering of people from around the country coming together to share, here's the alternatives we're implementing.
Great.
Here's the alternatives we're building. Here's, how we need to disrupt the current systems while we are building and reinforcing something more so rooted in care.
It's not just tearing it down. It's really the thoughtfulness of what is actually needed.
Mm-hmm.
What do people actually need? What do we need as society to heal, to prosper, to thrive, to be held accountable in a reasonable way that is for the benefit of everyone? Yes, there are victims, but a lot of the times the person who has committed a crime is also a victim.
Yeah.
And we keep on victimizing
and
them,
that was
right?
actually something really interesting that came up. So there was a session with Andrea Ritchie and Mariame Kaba, abolitionists, really powerful organizers. And it was a closed room session. And in the room, we were having a conversation around, we are seeing an escalation of mass incarceration in the U.S. We are seeing this in the development of cop cities, like we're seeing,
so insane,
like we're seeing in Georgia. We're seeing something similar kind of being built in Queens. You can Google search this. There's a map that shows where they all are. Here in New York City, there's a mandate that they have to shut down Rikers, and instead of, addressing what would prevent people from being sent to Rikers to begin with. They're just building jails throughout the city. They're building a jail in Chinatown and displacing, like Chinese American people. Chinatowns themselves were pulled together because of the U.S.'s staunch xenophobia, because they needed to look after one another. And so we're in this room, and we're all brainstorming, and we're sharing, okay, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. What can we learn from each other? And someone shared that some of the most staunch opposition to, dismantling mass incarceration, which also includes the concentration camps that the U.S. is responsible for of Japanese Americans and other, it includes the forced migration and genocide of indigenous peoples. It includes all of this. They said the most pushback, at least, where they live, that they were experiencing, was from some of these larger victim services organizations. So organizations where people who have survived violence, who have experienced violence, turn to for help and support, turn to for accountability, turn to for care. And then these organizations are instead of kind of really being, accountable to that and really thinking through what is needed, they're reinforcing these mass incarceration systems. And I think about it, there's an organization here in New York City, I'm not going to say the name, but if you know, I'm sure you'll figure it out. They support survivors of sexual violence, right? Yeah. And that includes, they have a very deep relationship with the NYPD.
Survivors of sexual violence also go to jail.
Exactly. And this organization, collaborates with the NYPD. And this is for folks who might want to file police reports. And it's also complicated, right? Sometimes if you have a child, sometimes you have to file the police report to then access other social services later. So I'm not saying it's not complicated, I promise. They're putting Band-Aids on open wounds, right? A lot of, police reform efforts, a lot of, supporting survivors of violence, whether that violence and trauma is an acute or singular incident, or whether it's the chronic trauma of surviving systemic oppression. Right? These massive organizations that are putting a Band-Aid on this open wound, they're not actually addressing the issue. And then I see traffic cops and I think about how much we as taxpayers are paying per hour for someone to be in this role of authority and kind of a threat because they're
really
part of the
just
NYPD.
there to swing your dick.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
I think about that, and it's very petty. And, I don't wish ill on that particular individual.
No.
I want them to have health care. I want them to have housing. I want them to have food. I want them to have care and fun.
What else?
But, what the fuck are we paying this for?
The community.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Imagine if we invested that in, I don't know, reinforcing free food programs. A tutor. Literally anything. Truly, literally anything.
Prison abolitionist and scholar Ruth Wilson Gilmore once wrote, "Those who feel in their gut deep anxiety that abolition means knock it all down, scorch the earth, and start something new, let that go. Abolition is building the future from the present in all of the ways we can." What are some of the tools available to some of these solutions that were proposed at the Beyond the Bars conference, or even systems that maybe are in place that can already be used, in the fight to abolish prisons?
And I think this is where, it gets a little bit complicated and it gets a little bit uncomfortable, right? I would say it that way, where, in my opinion, part of abolition is getting back into each other's business. There's a nosiness to abolition, right? There's a nosiness to, hey, what does my neighbor need? We may not be best friends, but we have a shared value in each other. What do they need?
Community watch,
right? There's a nosiness to, hey, there's a fight breaking out between a couple of kids in my neighborhood after school. That's not, kids are exploring boundaries. They're literally children.
Yes.
They're literally children. They're going through puberty. They're exploring boundaries.
If you have children on your lawn, guess what? You are the safekeeper of those children.
Right. Instead of this attitude.
What is so wrong with that?
Exactly. And instead we're sort of taught this children's parents are the sole people responsible for them, and that's that. And so I think that the uncomfortable, unsatisfying part of my answer is that abolition is a lot of nosiness.
Yeah.
It is a lot of sweating the small stuff.
To literally knocking on doors, knowing who your neighbors are.
Exactly.
Do you have enough?
Exactly.
To eat?
Exactly.
If you don't,
right.
Let's go to this community center.
And then some of it is skill building and learning, right?
Yeah.
Are we learning skills and tools to have relationships where consent and boundaries are honored? Are we learning, skills and tools on what to do when harm happens? Conflict and harm are inevitable. They're going to happen. It's just a fact of life. The amount of violence and the type of violence that we've normalized that is systemic oppression, it is targeted violence, right? Is not normal. Is way not normal. It doesn't have to be like this, y'all.
So funny whenever I see young people about to do something crazy.
Yeah.
The first thing that comes out of my mouth, I know, because this is what I was taught in the hood.
Yeah.
I know your mother taught you better than that.
Yeah.
And it always works.
It always works. If people really understood how much of an industry, right? Running like a business, an industry that prisons and policing is, those are taxpayer dollars. That is people's time, people's energy being poured into sustaining these incredibly toxic and violent spaces, institutions, etc. Right? We see this in corporations that have infamously used prison labor to produce their products.
Yeah,
sure. In the California fires recently, it was brought to many more people's attention that there are incarcerated folks being forced to fight fires for cents on the dollars because it is offered to them as the state has you and your body and your life hostage. Will you accept this deal?
It's the fetishization of labor.
Yes. And for those same incarcerated firefighters, they're not even allowed to become firefighters in California communities once they're released from incarceration.
Back to access. Why don't they
So
have
what
the access
happens
to
then?
it? Yeah.
They have these skills. They know what they're doing. They're good at it. You know, so when we think about, you know, okay, what systems, what structures are alternative, it needs to happen on every level, right? We need to be thinking about ideologically, why is it that the most we can imagine of each other is brutal punishment and enslavement?
Yeah.
If you look up the Constitution, slavery is still legal to this day via incarceration, via prisons, right? We need to really think about it in our institutions. How are we reinforcing that, right? What does that mean and look like when a patient self-advocates in a hospital and someone doesn't like it? Then what happens to them? How does that look like in our schools, right? When a kid is self-advocating or is still learning boundaries or still understanding the environment, what does that look like? What does that mean for what we've internalized, what we are capable and worthy of or not? And then how does that show up interpersonally? It was very well known that a director of an organization I worked at was anti-Black and racist and micro and macro aggressing Black women in the office, right? What are my options, right? If HR is quote unquote doing their job, it's punishment and punitive, which maybe could result in that same, you know, that white woman director losing. It doesn't solve the problem. And then the alternative was that same HR team didn't say anything. Or if they did, it was, I have questions. And so the behavior continued. And ultimately, who was experiencing the harm? The same Black women who ultimately got laid off, pushed out of that organization.
As someone who is a victim and has been a child, at least, in the injustice system. I learned that from a young person last year. I was like, yes, the injustice system. Who had parents locked up, namely my mom. She was a thief. She stole car parts for money because she was abusing drugs, heroin and crack. Stay off of the heroin and crack, guys. It wasn't until that, yes, it's part that she wanted to, but also part that she was shown that she could and that it was available to her, that she can put herself in an inpatient program. It provided residential substance abuse treatment and rehabilitation, that she matured into the woman, the mother, the grandmother, the friend that she is today. She's also a community organizer and volunteer. And, you know, almost 30 years of sobriety.
Congrats.
None of her time spent in the jail cell did that. That was a rehabilitation program meant to literally rehabilitate her instead of throwing the word rehabilitation and coupling it with a jail cell.
Yeah.